Good morning. In continuation with chapter 13, today we'll start with the topic life history variations. Now, populations they evolve to maximize their reproductive fitness, also called as Darwinian fitness, where higher R value in the habitat in which they live. We know that R stands for what? R is the intrinsic rate of natural increase. Now, under a particular set of selection pressures, organisms evolve towards the most efficient reproductive strategy. Some organisms they breed only once in their lifetime, like Pacific salmon fish or bamboo, whereas others they breed many times during their lifetime, like most birds or mammals. Some produce a large number of small-sized offsprings like oysters and pelagic fishes, while others produce a small number of large-sized offsprings like birds and mammals. So, which is desirable for maximizing fitness? Ecologists suggest that life history traits of organisms have evolved in relation to the constraints imposed by the abiotic and biotic components of the habitat in which they live. Evolution of life history traits in different species is an important area of research being conducted by ecologists. Population interactions. Can you think of any natural habitat on Earth that is inhabited just by a single species? There is no such habitat, and such a situation is even inconceivable. For any species, the minimal requirement is one more species on which it can feed. Even a plant species which makes its own food cannot survive alone. It needs soil microbes to break down the organic matter in soil, return the inorganic nutrients for absorption, and then how will the plant manage pollination without any animal agent? It is obvious that in nature, animals, plants, and microbes do not and cannot live in isolation but interact in various ways to form a biological community. So, even in minimal communities, many interactive linkages exist, although all may not be readily apparent. Now, interspecific interactions arise from the interaction of populations of two different species. They could be beneficial, detrimental, or neutral, neither harm nor benefit to one of the species or both. So here you can have a look at this table. Like if the species A and species B both are benefited, then it is called as mutualism. Here if none of the species is benefited, that is competition. And here species A is benefited and species B is not benefited, predation. So in parasitism, one species is benefited, commensalism, one species is benefited, and in ammensialism we find that one is harmed and other is neither benefited nor harmed. So let's talk about predation. Now, what would happen to all the energy fixed by autotrophic organisms if the community has no animals to eat the plants? You can think of predation as nature's way of transferring to higher trophic levels the energy fixed by plants. When we think of predator and prey, here you can have a picture, predator and prey. Here it is a tiger and deer that readily come to our mind, but a sparrow eating any seed is no less than a predator. Animals eating plants are categorized separately as herbivores. They are in broad ecological context not very different from predators. So besides acting as conduits for energy transfer across trophic level, predators play another important roles also. They keep prey populations under control. Now, but for predators, prey species could achieve very high population densities and cause ecosystem instability. Now, when certain exotic species are introduced into a geographical area, they become invasive and start spreading fast because the invaded land does not have its natural predators. The prickly pear cactus. When we give this example, prickly pear cactus, when it was introduced into Australia in early 1920s, it caused havoc by spreading rapidly into millions of hectares of rangeland. Finally, the invasive cactus was brought under control only after a cactus feeding predator, a moth from its natural habitat, uh, was introduced into the uh, country. So biological control methods adopted in agricultural pest control are based on the ability of the predator to regulate prey population. Predators also helps in maintaining species diversity in a community by reducing the intensity of competition among competing prey species. Now, in the rocky intertidal communities of American Pacific coast, the starfish Pisaster is an important predator. In the field experiment, when all the starfish were removed from an enclosed intertidal area, more than 10 species of invertebrates became extinct within a year because of the interspecific competitions. Now, if a predator is too efficient and overexploits its prey, then the prey might become extinct, and following it, the predator will also become extinct for the lack of food. Now, this is the reason why predators in the nature are prudent. Now, prey species, they have evolved various defenses to lessen the impact of predation. Some species of insects and frogs are cryptically colored, they are camouflaged to avoid being detected easily by the predators. Some are poisonous and therefore they are avoided by the predators. The monarch butterfly is highly distasteful to its predator bird because of a specific chemical presence in its body. Now, the butterfly acquires this chemical during the caterpillar stage by feeding on a poisonous weed. Now, for plants, herbivores are the predators. Nearly 25% of all insects are known to be phytophagous. Phytophagous means feeding on plant sap and other plants, parts of the plants. So the problem is particularly severe to plants because unlike animals, they cannot run away from the predator. So plants therefore have evolved an astonishingly variety of morphological and chemical defenses against herbivores. Thorns in acacia and cactus. They have thorns and they are most common morphological means of defense. Many plants produce and store chemicals that make the herbivores sick when they are eaten. So that is inhibit the feeding or digestion disruption, its reproduction, or even kill it. So we must have seen the weed Calotropis, akh jisko bolte hain. Calotropis is just growing in the abandoned fields, and the plant produces a highly poisonous cardiac glycosides, and that is why you never see any cattle or goat browsing on this plant. So a wide variety of chemical substances that we extract from plants on a commercial scale, like nicotine, caffeine, quinine, cane, opium, etc., they are produced by them actually as defenses against grazers and browsers. Competition. Now, when Darwin spoke on the struggle for existence and survival of the fittest in nature, he was convinced that interspecific competition is a potent it is a potent force in organic evolution. It is generally believed that competition occurs when closely related species compete for the same resource that are limiting, but this is not entirely true. Firstly, totally unrelated species could also compete for the same resource. For instance, in some shallow South American lakes, visiting flamingos, you can see the picture of flamingos here. Now, these flamingos and resident fishes, they compete for their common food, the zooplanktons in the lake. And secondly, the resources need not to be limiting for competition to occur. In interference competition, the feeding efficiency of one species might be reduced due to the interfering and inhibitory presence of the other species. So even if resources, that is food and space, are abundant, so the competition is best defined as a process in which the fitness of one species is measured in terms of R. The intrinsic rate of increase is significantly lower in the presence of the another species. So it is relatively easy to demonstrate in laboratory experiments, as Gauss and other experimental ecologists they did, when resources are limited, the competitively superior species will eliminate the other species. But evidence for such competitive exclusions occurring in nature is not always conclusive. Like strong and persuasive circumstantial evidences does exist, however, in some cases. The Abingdon tortoise in Galapagos Islands became extinct within a decade after goats were introduced. Goats were introduced on the island, so due to the greater browsing efficiency of the goats. So another evidence for the occurrence of competition in nature comes from that which is called as competitive release. A species whose distribution is restricted to a small geographical area because of the presence of a competitively superior species is found to expand its distributional range dramatically when the competing species is experimentally removed. Now, Connell's elegant field experiments showed that on the rocky sea coast of Scotland, the larger and competitively superior barnacles, Balanus, dominates the intertidal area and excludes the smaller barnacle, that is Cathamelis, from that zone. So in general, herbivores and plants appear to be more adversely affected by competition than the carnivores. So Gauss's competition exclusion principle states that two closely related species competing for the same resources cannot coexist independently, and the competitively inferior one will be eliminated eventually. So this may be true if resources are limiting, but not otherwise. More recent studies do not support such gross generalizations about competition, while they do not rule out the occurrence of interspecific competition in nature. So they point out that species facing competition might evolve mechanisms that promote coexistence rather than exclusion. One such mechanism is a resource partitioning. Now, if two species compete for the same resource, they could avoid competition by choosing, for instance, different times for feeding or different foraging patterns. Like MacArthur showed that 5 closely related species of warblers, they're living on the same tree, were able to avoid competition and coexist due to behavioral differences in their foraging activities. Thank you for today.